To kickstart Session 1 on the state of climate action and ambition, it is our honor to have Mr. Peter Becker, President and CEO of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, to be our first keynote speaker. As Mr. Becker is currently in Geneva, he cannot join us in person today, but he has recorded a video to set the scene for today's discussion. Let's watch the video.
Hello, dear friends in Hong Kong. It's great to be with the Business Environment Council, or BEC. I'm Peter Becker. I'm the President and CEO of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or WBCSD. And it's a great pleasure to address today the BEC EnviroSeries Conference. Actually, the last international speech I made was in Hong Kong all the way back in January 2020. So I know we've all gotten used to seeing speakers on screens, and that's what I'm doing for you today. But I really look forward to coming back to Hong Kong and meet you next time in person. For those of you who don't know, WBCSD, 240 of the leading companies in the world working together at CEO level to accelerate the system transformations that are needed to get to a net zero, nature positive, and more equitable future. The BEC is part of our global network of more than 60 business organizations from around the world. It's even one of our oldest members, as since 2003, we've been working together to advance Hong Kong's sustainability efforts through various joint projects. For example, over the last years, we've put in place the BEC WBCSD Roundtable on Sustainable Buildings. In 2019, we had a CEO luncheon, which I attended in Hong Kong in August of that year, set up a series of meetings with BEC in the Transport Department of Hong Kong in 2021. And in the past few years, WBCSD speakers supported various editions of the conference you're having today. It is my pleasure to address you today, particularly as we are celebrating BEC's 30th anniversary, which is quite a milestone to be proud of. The theme of your conference today, driving business ambition into action for a net zero Hong Kong, is spot on. The business case to contribute to an equitable net zero nature positive economy is now clear and is well laid out in WBCSD's Vision 2050 Time to Transform report. Business is the most important driver in leading the transformation needed for a world in which more than 9+ billion people will live well within planetary boundaries by 2050. Or otherwise said, a net zero, nature positive and equitable future. Sustainability has now really gone mainstream, and as environmental and social pressures heighten across the world, expectations from capital market and society on business accountability for delivering solutions for this net zero, nature positive and equitable world continue to build and accelerate. As we accelerate the transition to a resilient zero carbon future, the private sector has a key role to play in Hong Kong as well as in other places in the world. We have less than 10 years to halve global emissions if we are to meet the science-based target of staying below 1.5 degrees of global warming. Over 80% of all business sector carbon emissions are coming from scope 3 or value chain emissions. Emissions that are not in the direct control of the business themselves, but are created as part of the production of the product or the use and end-of-life disposal of the product. A lack of a shared methodology on how to calculate and report on these emissions is hindering business attempts to actually reduce the emissions themselves. The variety of size and scale of business within the supply chain means that not every actor is able to reduce their emissions alone. Collaboration and investment throughout value chains are needed. In 2022, WBCSD will be working with members and partners through the Partnership for Carbon Transparency, or PACT, to develop a methodology for calculation and exchange of primary emissions data, leveraging the Greenhouse Gas Protocol based on collaborative thinking and close alignment. The Pathfinder network will enable organizations to exchange data across their supply chains and industries, linking up existing tech solutions and platforms in parallel, BEC is also taking action and launched its low carbon charter in March of 2019. This is a first of its kind initiative to mobilize companies in Hong Kong to set and achieve carbon reduction targets. I was very impressed to hear that you now currently have already 108 signatories of different sizes from the commercial sector, NGOs, and academic institutions. To support signatories, BEC has added different programs focusing on the construction sector, Scope 3 emissions, and carbon disclosures. I am confident that through your work on sustainability and under the leadership of BEC, business in Hong Kong will play a leading role in contributing to our Vision 2050 for a world in which 9+ billion people live well within planetary boundaries. I want to end by once again congratulating BEC for the 30 years of environmental excellence in Hong Kong. We very much appreciate BEC's support and look forward to greater cooperation. I wish the conference a great success, and I really look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
I'm sure we have plenty of takeaway from Mr. Becker's sharing. Moving on to our second keynote speaker, we are pleased to have Mr. Ken O'Flaherty, who is the UK government's COP26 Regional Ambassador to Asia Pacific and South Asia, to deliver a keynote presentation. Mr. O'Flaherty has recorded a video for us too. Let's watch the video.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ken O'Flaherty, COP26 Regional Ambassador for Asia Pacific and South Asia. First of all, a big thank you to the Business Environment Council for inviting me to speak to you today as part of what I'm sure will be a fantastic event. I'm going to be giving you a quick recap of what was agreed at COP26, what more needs to be done, and what the priorities are for the UK's presidency of COP before we hand over to Egypt later this year. So COP26 concluded in November 2021 with 197 parties agreeing the Glasgow Climate Pact, reaching consensus on the need for urgent climate action. With it, we've narrowed the ambition gap as net zero commitments now cover 90% of the world's economy, up from 30% 2 years ago when the UK first took on the COP26 presidency. The text of the pact saw all countries agree to revisit and strengthen their current emissions targets to 2030, known as Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs, in 2022. This will be combined with a yearly political roundtable and an annual global progress report, as well as a leaders' summit convened by the UN Secretary-General in 2023. Additionally, there is a request for countries to submit long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies towards transitions to net zero emissions by or around mid-century by COP27. The pact also established a work programme to urgently scale up the mitigation ambition and implementation in this critical decade, and an annual high-level ministerial roundtable on pre-2030 ambition. The Paris Rulebook, the guidelines for how the Paris Agreement is delivered, was also completed at COP26 after 6 years of discussions. This will now allow for the full delivery of the landmark accord. It included finalising enhanced transparency framework, which will enable accountability and confidence as countries deliver on their targets. It also included common timeframes for NDCs, which provided guidance that emissions reductions targets communicated in 2025 should now cover the same time period, making it easier to understand what 2035 climate commitments add up to and if we're on track to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius target alive. Countries agreed the way forward on the new post-2025 climate finance goal, establishing an ad hoc work programme that will create space for parties to move beyond the 100 billion goal and have a serious and inclusive discussion about how the levels of finance to deliver on Paris can be mobilised, ensuring a legacy for the work the UK presidency has undertaken on both public and private finance for years to come. And for the first time, heeding calls from countries most vulnerable to climate impacts, the COP agreed an action plan on phasing down the use of coal. This is a monumental step that demonstrates a powerful shift to clean energy and sets a major precedent for further action in this area, building, of course, on the progress made under our presidency on international financing and commitments. COP26 agreed the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work programme on the global goal on adaptation and the Glasgow dialogue on loss and damage to discuss funding arrangements to avert, minimise and address loss and damage. Recognising the critical role of capacity building, the Glasgow Climate Pact welcomed the outcomes of the COP26 Catalyst for Climate Action. The UK established this to bring together key stakeholders to develop recommendations to target capacity building challenges in areas related to adaptation, finance, carbon markets and transparency, and strong commitments by parties to take forward action on capacity building. So there was a huge amount achieved in Glasgow. It's now for countries around the world to take action and deliver on those commitments. As COP26 presidency, the UK has an important role in driving ambition and supporting other countries in their efforts to align with the Paris Agreement. But we're also leading by example and considering our own response in doing so. The UK's own NDC commits to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 68% by 2030 based on 1990 levels, excluding emissions from international aviation and shipping. The Climate Change Committee has advised that the UK's current target is aligned with the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. The government will continue to review the latest available evidence to ensure that it remains so. And alongside this, we will focus on delivery. We will build on the plan set out in the Net Zero strategy to demonstrate how we will achieve our 2030 target and account for the progress that we're making. We'll also consider other ways we can strengthen our NDC and ensure that we are following international best practice from the Paris Rulebook on information for clarity, transparency and understanding, and we'll publish any updates to our NDC ahead of COP27. We now need to turn the pledges made in Glasgow into actions. In 2022, the UK government will continue to act as a global leader on climate policy, and we're keen to support all countries in developing increased ambition in their climate actions so that together we can all keep 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. Our COP26 presidency will end in November this year. Our objective is to maintain the momentum that parties built at Glasgow and use this to support success in other key fora. We'll be working closely with the incoming presidency of COP27, Egypt, to build a partnership that aligns priorities and plans, secures the legacy of the Glasgow Climate Pact, and delivers impact and progress on the Paris Agreement goals at Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27. There are some key pillars of our COP26 2022 strategy that are facilitating our work in this year. Mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and finance. Our aims for each of these pillars are as follows. Firstly, on mitigation, we must secure increased 2030 NDCs, particularly from major emitters, alongside stronger sectoral commitments and policies, including on coal and zero-emission vehicles. We'll work with Egypt ahead of the first ministerial roundtable on pre-2030 ambition at COP27 and the launch of the mitigation work programme to scale up ambition in this critical decade. On adaptation, we must demonstrate that enough progress is being made through the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work programme on the global goal on adaptation and with efforts to double adaptation finance. And on finance, we need to deliver the $100 billion goal and advance discussions on the post-2025 finance goal. On loss and damage, we want to find practical solutions and support arrangements through the Santiago Network and Glasgow Dialogue on Loss and Damage. So this all amounts to a challenging work programme, but it's vital to achieving the change we all agreed was necessary at COP26. And we're working closely with COP27 presidency Egypt to drive delivery. Between now and COP27, there are a number of important milestones. We've recently had the Stockholm Plus 50, which you'll be hearing about a little later, as well as the Bonn Intersessional earlier this month. Looking ahead, there's Climate Week in New York in September, as well as the pre-COP, which will take place this autumn. All of these offer opportunities to maintain the momentum and push for even greater ambition as COP27 approaches. It's vital that we all move together to deliver on the expectations set out in the Glasgow Climate Pact. We will use the full calendar of international events in 2022 to build on the momentum and high ambition from COP26 and ensure that the commitments announced in Glasgow are fully implemented. As COP26 President Alok Sharma said at the end of proceedings in Glasgow, it's up to all of us to sustain the lodestar of keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. After the collective dedication which has delivered the Glasgow Climate Pact, our work here cannot be wasted. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very fruitful set of discussions today.
Hope you have all enjoyed Mr. O'Flaherty's forward-looking video. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Per Augustsson, who is the Consul General at Consulate General of Sweden to Hong Kong and Macau, to give us a keynote speech. Mr. Augustsson, please.
Thank you very much. Daigaho, everyone. It's really great to be here. Great to see everyone. Chairman, Kevin O'Brien. CEO, Simon Ng. Dear friends and colleagues, first of all, thank you for the invitation to speak here today at the BEC Conference on driving business ambition into action for a net zero Hong Kong. It's been a real pleasure and privilege to get to know you and BEC over the course of the last year and to cooperate with you on important matters, including the seminar we did right here together in December last year on how to make a green transition, when we also had the honor to enjoy the participation of Secretary Wong. And it was really interesting to listen to his remarks earlier on the action taken in Hong Kong. We welcome, of course, Hong Kong's ambitions and its climate action plan to ultimately reach carbon neutrality. From the Swedish side, we are certainly very happy to continue to work together and share experiences on how to actually achieve our common goals of a net zero future. We have found that close cooperation between the public and private sectors, between government and companies, can make a great difference in terms of results. Later on, during the panel discussion, Torbjörn Magnusson of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce Sustainability Committee will share, I think, some ideas and experiences from Swedish companies here in Hong Kong on concrete ways to make progress on the green agenda. Just a few weeks ago, on the 2nd and 3rd of June, 150 countries gathered in Stockholm to focus on the climate and the global environment at the Stockholm Plus 50 conference, which was jointly hosted by Sweden and Kenya. They concluded that we must accelerate the transition towards a more sustainable future by doing more in science, in innovation, and education. That we need to scale up green financing, that cooperation must be strengthened generally, and also that we need to involve young people. In other words, we need to rethink how we do things and how we measure economic success and growth. My country, Sweden, has set the goal to reach net zero emissions by 2045 and also to become the first fossil-free welfare country in the world. Again, close cooperation between government and the private sector has been and will continue to be the key for us in making progress. We can already actually see how the climate transition creates new jobs in our economy and new economic opportunities. In fact, in many ways, as I think was referred to here earlier, our companies are pushing and driving this process, which is great. One thing is for sure, we are in this together, so we need to work together. Today's conference is a great chance to deepen dialogue on how to take action, how to strengthen innovation, and also how to build partnership for a more sustainable future. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Augustin. Before we move on to the panel discussion, I would like to remind our online participants to use the Q&A box if you have any questions for our panelists. For audience in the room, you may raise your hands and we will pass you the mic. Now, may I invite Mr. Simon Ng, Chief Executive Officer of BEC, to moderate this session. Simon, over to you, please.
Well, good morning. Thank you for coming to BEC. And of course, thank you as well for those joining online. It's a great honor, great pleasure to see so many people in the room. I think we already heard that we've got a record high in terms of registration for this event. So I think it kind of demonstrates how important this topic is. And we are in all together to make it happen and to make it work. Now, this is a panel discussion. We have 30 minutes, and I'm very pleased that I'm joined by Mrs. Tamsin Heath from the British Consulate General. And we are joining also by Joe Phelan from WBCSD Asia Pacific, based in Singapore. Good morning, Joe. Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, very well.
Well, very colorful background. And Torbjørn, I think you are now in Thailand. Torbjørn is the chairman of the Sustainability Committee of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. Good morning, Torbjørn.
Good morning.
Nice to have you here. Well,
nice
thank
to
you.
be here.
Thank you for joining. So let me start with Tamsin. Tamsin, I don't know whether you remember the last time we met face to face.
When was that? No, I think it was in maybe HKUST?
Yes, it was actually exactly 1 year ago.
1 year ago.
June
wow.
17th, 2021. And we were, at the same, panel talking about Race to Zero. That's a pre-COP 26 event hosted, or jointly hosted by BEC, HKUST, and Civic Exchange. So time flies, and 1 year on, Tamsin, I think I'd like to hear from you. What's the sentiment post-COP 26 in terms of business climate ambition, and also what are the challenges you think we are facing right now to turn ambition into action? Now, because you're operating at the international and national level, I think you can bring in a lot of insights in terms of the strategic level. So what are the targets being set? What are the opportunities for collaboration? What are the opportunities to bring in resources, including financial resources, but how to work together at the national level? I think that's what we want to hear from you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope we met your kind of goals at the time when we spoke a year ago about what we wanted to get out of COP26. And I think it was a challenging environment to hold a climate conference. Obviously, it happened 2 years on, but I think what I particularly took away from that is just that we managed to keep that ambition there to meet 1.5 degrees. You could have got the leaders together and people say, actually, you know what, there's so much else going on in the world, we can't do this. We're not going to try and hit 1.5, we're going to go for a less ambitious deal. And we didn't. We kept that dream alive, and that is very firmly committed. And actually, I feel quite energized by today to hear all these fantastic initiatives that are happening and the sort of ambition that is being driven not just by governments, but by businesses saying, no, we're going to do this, and we're going to have the regulatory frameworks that support that, but we're also, as businesses, we want to do this, our staff want to do this, this is going to happen. So, I mean, I think the things that we felt particularly proud of when we look back at that are the sort of historic references to ending coal. That was a big thing. To ending fossil fuel subsidies, making progress on that. Those are things that are going to make a really big difference. I think over the course of this year, I mean, it really is about taking that commitment to achieving that and actually delivering that. So as Ken talked about, all of the countries attending it agreed to review their national development contributions over the next year, and so reviewing what they were going to achieve by 2030. We really need to push on that. There is a challenging environment. As you talked about the sort of the challenges, I mean, elephant in the room, there has been an invasion of Ukraine, and there has been rising energy prices, there has been rising food prices around the world. There is a lot going on, and the world is recovering from a pandemic. So there's a lot else on leaders' mind, there's a lot else on businesses' mind. But actually, it focuses the mind on things like energy security, and it means that we are all starting to think about, we need to move to clean energy for a variety of different reasons. So I actually think there's more reasons for ambition. And you also talked about how we're bringing people together. So I think one of the things that the UK is very focused on is how do we use all the different events that are happening over the next year, at the G20, at the G7, all of these different events, but also really in reality, in rooms like this, to sort of bring people together, to link people up, to try and find all of those committed people to try and make this, these sort of lofty goals a reality, because that's what's really going to drive the change.
Okay, thank you, Thompson. Now, you mentioned the war in Ukraine and then the impact on, people's perception and preparation about energy security. Now, would that affect the NDC that, I can also mention, because last year before COP26, I think everyone was disappointed in terms of the level of ambition with the NDC. So it's like they were given another chance this year to improve the ambition. But do you think that, the war and, the other cascading impact would affect the level of NDC that you would be receiving?
I think that the thing for us as COP presidents is we really want to make sure, and we are going to be lobbying all around the world to try to get people to be as ambitious as possible. And ultimately, it's for individual countries to decide what they can achieve. We as the UK have already put forward a very ambitious NDC, and we're very committed to doing that. So irrespective of all of the discussions we've been having in the UK about how we're going to handle all the different challenges that we face, this is still front and center of our ambition. We are not lowering ambition. So I think it's sort of using all of these different dialogues, using all these different sort of sessions to try and make this a reality. And actually, I think there's a role for businesses to say, no, we can do this, because that holds the feet to the fire, makes it more possible for governments to move to more ambitious agreements.
Okay, just one last question before I switch to Joe. What about any plans in Hong Kong? Because as you said, and also Ken mentioned that UK is leading the way with a lot of initiatives back home. Can you share, those experience or, ambition also in Hong Kong with Hong Kong people, working closer with the Hong Kong government? Any plans at all?
To work with the Hong Kong government?
Yes.
So we have a dialogue with the Hong Kong government on a number of different issues. And I think it was really great to hear from Secretary Wong about what the ambition is to do. And I think on things like electric vehicles, obviously we've got some experience in the UK. We have the delights of the double-decker buses, and it was great to hear what he's been working on. I think we can work together and share experiences. I think a lot, in reality, partly because of the inability to travel very effectively, I think the majority of our kind of collaboration is actually business to business. And there's some fantastic examples of business to business collaboration here in Hong Kong and over the period. So in looking backwards, things like Tai Kwun, Tea Park, all of these different things, particularly in the built environment, have made a big difference. But there's also lots of really exciting other projects working together where we've had a big impact.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tamsin. Joe, I know you've just moved from India to Singapore with with bigger responsibilities. And I'm just curious, in the Asia Pacific region, especially, Asia, with so many countries at different levels of development, what is the level of ambition in general in Asia Pacific? And what will be your challenges, moving into this new position to keep or even raise the level of ambition among your membership countries?
So yeah, thanks very much, and congratulations to all of you on your anniversary. And it's a pleasure to be here. So at WBCSD, we work with about 215 of the world's largest and most ambitious companies, including 44 from the Asia Pacific region. And they work together through WBCSD to be ready to understand, to benchmark, and to act on the climate emergency, on nature in crisis, and on rising inequality. They collaborate with their peers through their value chains to transform them, to make them more resilient and more sustainable. And they work together to improve capital market engagement so that the financial markets are better informed about the decisions that businesses are making through these transitions, so that finance flows to transformation and the companies that get it right attract a lower cost of capital. In terms of climate and ambition across the region, you know, certainly there's a lot of attention on climate witnessed today, and that is because of disruptions from extreme weather events. It's because of questions from the investor community, and also actions by government, including setting net zero targets across the region, such as in Hong Kong. As a group, our members, you know, the question is it an appropriate level of ambition? And our members set a new set of criteria for being a member of WBCSD, which together are very ambitious. And for climate, the group decided that the appropriate level of ambition for the climate emergency that we're in is to set a net zero target for 2050 or sooner, to have reduction plans using science-informed interim targets, and for those reduction plans to include not only Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but also the majority of Scope 3 emissions. And that we felt as a membership organization that was where, and a leadership organization, that was what was appropriate for leading businesses that were ambitious. Now, if that is the level of ambition, then there are some that's appropriate. There are some shining examples across the world, and you know, in this region, for example, Hitachi certainly are operating at that level, and there are many others who are working towards that. So, for example, CLP have been championing climate action for a long time. Swire Properties and Swire Coca-Cola set science-based targets for those businesses. Out of Mumbai, the Tatas have set a net zero target for 2045. The Aditya Birla Group has set a net zero target for 2050. Companies like Petronas in Malaysia and Jardines in Hong Kong, there's a lot of work going on internally that isn't yet public. And I think that that's a common trait of industry in this region, is to be slow on declaring publicly what you're working on and making progress internally. But even allowing for this, there is not the level of ambition or action anywhere in the world commensurate with the challenges that we face. And I think that it's critical for businesses and cities across Asia, because this region is the most vulnerable. But perhaps more importantly, there's huge opportunities in terms of competitiveness, in terms of making lives better, making our cities better to live and work in through tackling climate change. And it's already the case that we are having to adapt, and that will increase. And our spends and our efforts on adapting to climate change will increase. But still, mitigating climate change remains by far the most cost-effective approach. And there are limits to how much climate change any city or any business can adapt to. So it is absolutely crucial that, that companies understand right now their impacts, their dependencies, where the hotspots are in their whole value chains, and put in plans to tackle them urgently.
Well, thank you, Joe. I think your last sentence is extremely important. I think that's the right message that we need to put to our participants today, because they need to know where are the hotspots. They really need to take action, you know, with that particularly in mind. Now, thank you, Joe. Now, I'd like to move on to Torben. Well, thank you for joining. Now, Sweden is a leader in sustainability. I think everyone agrees with that. And the Swedish business community in Hong Kong actually is also very active. And you have been, engaging the government from time to time. You're putting together different initiatives to drive business action in Hong Kong, not just within the business Swedish business community, but also with the entire business community in Hong Kong. So can you share with the audience, what are you working on right now in Hong Kong, trying to do more and accelerate change?
Thank you. So, yes, I'm the chairman of the Sustainability Committee for the Swedish Chamber of Commerce. And we are driving various initiatives, basically with the purpose of helping Hong Kong reach its climate goals with a little bit of inspiration from what is done in Sweden and what Swedish companies can offer. And I'm a little bit of an odd bird in this society because actually this work is not my day job. I'm leading a Swedish company in Hong Kong, and we all do. So we all have a clear business perspective in this one. As a matter of fact, as you mentioned, Sweden is a leader in sustainability, and also Swedish companies are very often leaders on a sustainable path and sustainable way of doing business. So we also believe that if we are able to change the sentiment and policy direction of Hong Kong, it will be good for driving the development at a faster pace, but it's also something that is good for the Swedish business community. So we also have a business purpose. And I think this is one of the leading marks of how I see drive towards green development, is that we need to find a path that combines the green path with a business viable path. And I think here we can learn a lot from what's been done in Sweden. We're just now working on, or have just concluded work on a position paper that elaborates a little bit upon a few points where we think that Hong Kong can learn from Sweden. And the first point that we are bringing up is how collaboration between enterprise and government happens in Sweden. Since 2015, there's been a joint initiative with enterprise and with the government called Fossil Free Sweden, where enterprise and government works together to identify hotspots, like Joe said, or policy initiatives that can drive down the carbon intensity in the economy with or without investment, but in a cost-efficient way, and really identify those barriers. That's not only about pouring more money down, but actually building a level playing field with a climate perspective, so that you actually take the full climate cost into account and that you drive the competitive environment so that the green businesses have a good chance of winning. And I think this is a key point also for Hong Kong, that the green business need to have a good chance of winning. We need a policy direction that clearly promotes green business, and we also need a public sentiment that really values green development. And that's key, because then we will see by itself, inherently, businesses becoming more and more green. So working together, identifying policy initiatives, and tearing down the barriers in a very structured form is something that we think we can learn from. And I very much appreciate the initiative from Secretary Wong on encouraging target setting on equal terms, both for government and for businesses. But I think it's not only about setting targets, it's also about collaborating together. Then secondly, the most important source of carbon emission in Hong Kong is electricity generation. And to reach the target of Hong Kong to be climate neutral by 2050, we believe, I mean, you run the numbers, we need to accelerate the development of not burning stuff that you find in the ground to generate electricity. We need to find electricity from elsewhere. We need to work with the electricity generated in Hong Kong and also the electricity that we are getting from mainland China, to find it from other sources. A third field that we are commenting upon a little bit is the construction sector, also touching upon how you build green buildings, but also taking into account the enormous construction activity that always happens in Hong Kong. We believe that both the rule-based network, the perspective, and the public sentiment could benefit from changing and taking a little bit more of a long-term perspective thinking about the materials that you use. How can we make sure that it's a long-term use material and that you take the full life cycle cost into account when doing construction, and not only looking for the cheapest upfront option. It's urgent to solve public housing and build quickly right now. Absolutely agree on that. But it's also urgent that those public housing estates still stands there in 30 years without having to put down massive amounts of money and carbon resources to keep them there. And last but not least, a little bit of a new topic that we have touched upon is actually the food system of Hong Kong. Many of you don't know it, but Hong Kong is actually one of the places on earth where meat consumption per capita is highest. And if you listen to the latest international panel, intergovernmental panel on climate change, the sole area where they actually advise many individuals to make the same choice for the benefit on the planet is actually in what you eat. To not abandon fully, but to consider whether we can exchange a part of our diet for a plant-based option instead of a meat-based option. It's good for the planet and certainly good for your health. And those options are also good value for money and quite good for your taste buddies as well. So those 4 areas are the key things that we have identified as areas where Hong Kong can learn from Sweden in this recent policy paper.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Torben, for your sharing. Now, I have received a question from the audience. How can we be part of the carbon neutrality partnership? Is it by invitation at the moment? Now, if I may reframe this question, there are different initiatives, being put together by different organizations, including, countries, organizations like WBCSD, maybe business associations, chambers. Maybe, Joe, for example, can you share what are the opportunities for the business sector to be part of some of your initiatives? And I guess Torben can also say a few words about, because it's part of collaboration, really. And I don't think we should, set a bar to say, oh, you can't join, you have to pay a lot to join. I think it's all about trying to make a difference and make things happen. So Joe, can you start first? Say a few words about that.
Sure. So the main program that we have in this area is addressing the challenge for businesses of tackling their Scope 3 emissions. And it's focused on 2 problems. The first is that in the accounting rules for greenhouse gas emissions, there's not enough detail on Scope 3 and where the cost and the credit for carbon emissions should go. So, for example, with the embedded carbon in the table that I'm sat at today, should the furniture company get the credit for that, or should the forestry company get the credit for that? Without those rules, we can't create incentives for action. So we have a group of more than 70 organizations that are working with a mandate to define those rules. So with scientists and academia and civil society and business. The second area that's a challenge is the transparency of data. So for our Scope 3 out of our control emissions, we don't have sight of what the true emissions are. So therefore we can't target engagement to reduce, and often we're using proxies. So again, there's a similar group which is creating the principles on which data can be exchanged, because everyone's Scope 3 emissions is someone else's Scope 1 emissions. So this group is creating the rules for technology transfer of primary greenhouse gas emission data across the value chain in order to get a true picture of emissions and target decarbonisation efforts. Now, we're a membership organisation, and for business, the way to engage in that directly is as a member of the World Business Council. But we publish regular updates and reports which are publicly available, and that includes some deep dives for the built environment, for the mobility sector, and so on. And so these are available. Then additionally, some businesses want to connect to similar programs at national level and so on, for example, that run by the BEC in Hong Kong. But also we're interested outside of the business community as well as in connecting with stock exchanges, with academia and scientists, and others that we haven't thought of yet, to be part of ensuring that the accounting rules and the technology that we're developing as a consortia, are applicable and kind of universally valuable. So a lot of resources available, certainly interested in conversations with large businesses about joining and helping to shape and lead this work, and also interested in the wider community that are prioritizing this issue.
Thank you, Joe. Well, I think you should visit WBCSD's website because it's a very resourceful website, a lot of information there. Torben, what about what you're working on at the Swedish Chamber of Commerce? Any partnership, any program that actually other business partners or organizations can join?
We are very, very open. Almost all companies that have some sort of interest or stake in Sweden, or at least share our values, are welcome to join both the Chamber and the Sustainability Committee to contribute our work. That's one way. And we will also be hosting a number of programs and discussions with a little bit more open audience, both on this topic and other related topics. So you're most welcome to drop by and discuss. But if you really want the hardcore engagement, join the Chamber and join the committee and join ranks with us to influence policy direction and public opinion in Hong Kong.
Well, thank you. Tamsin, can I come back to you? Because I'm sure the UK government or the Consulate General in Hong Kong, you have programs or projects and opportunities to engage the local business community, youth, students, to work together. So what are the opportunities in the coming months leading to COP27?
I'll answer that, but I'll also flag one other initiative that it's worth looking at as well. So if you're a financial institution, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero is also something that was launched in Glasgow, and it was launched by Mark Carney and Mike Bloomberg, and I think there's 450 companies that have already joined it, about 130 billion in assets. And the idea is to try and align private financial investments alongside this public sector, and ultimately it's private sector financial flows that are going to make the really, really big difference here. So if you're a financial institution, that's really worth looking at and joining up and considering. I think in terms of what we're doing here in the consulate, so we're doing a number of different kind of dialogues throughout the year with youth here in Hong Kong. Our Consul General has done events with students, and we want to keep that going. We do a number of different, we do a women's mentoring program as well, where we also look to do that, and our Chevening Scholarship, where we sponsor students to go to the UK to study, also focuses on environment issues. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved with the consulate on a variety of different environment issues. We also have the British Chamber here, which is not attached to the British consulate, but is also very, very active and has a large number of members and dedicated committee focused on environment issues. A number of different companies here are focusing on that. So there's lots of different ways to get linked up with British companies and British interest here.
Well, thank you, Tamsin. I think we only have 3 more minutes to go. If I may ask each one of the panelists just to say, a short sentence or a pledge or a piece of advice to our audience, because we have a strong representation from the business sector in the audience today. So what would you say to them if you only have 1 minute? Joe.
Hey, so thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and appreciate your interest and your connection with the Business Environment Council. I would say that often this work appears to be removed or technical or have jargon in, and I would say to businesses that aren't already taking a lead, there is nothing to be afraid of in this space. It's a space where, as a business, you can bring what you're good at and the material issues for you, and really, actually, it's a space where you can go on your journey, but you can be leaders in. And what we really need is for industry to demonstrate some openness and a willingness to collaborate with other businesses and really start to tackle these issues, because there certainly are limits to what you can do on your own. There's a lot of goodwill, and please join this movement and help to shape it and speed up some resolutions.
Well, thank you, Joe. That's a nice one. Torben, what about you? What's your advice?
2 very concrete actions. In the decisions you make going forward, take a long-term perspective and think, how does the long-term perspective play well out economically, but also carbon emission-wise? In your private life, look at what you eat. That's what IPCC says you can do on your own starting today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Tamsin.
Those are very, very good ones. I mean, I think from my side, I think it is possible, and I think we all have to believe it is possible because it's so important. So I have 2 young children, and when they come home from school or from nursery, they do still talk about climate change, and it's still in their head, even at that age. And I think it's so important that we keep focusing on that. And I do think from what we've heard and from all of these different things, it is possible. There are ways of doing this. Taking the first steps, I think, are so important. So that's my message. It's possible.
Well, thank you. So it's possible. We have to work together, take action, and join hands, and we shall not survive. We shall win. Well, with that, I'd like to close this panel. Thank you for joining. I think we pretty much set the scene for the rest of the conference, and I'm sure you'll stay tuned until the end of the day. But for now, thank you. Thank you so much. Please give a big hand to our panelists.
Thank you, Simon, and our speakers for the insightful discussion. This brings us to the end of the first session.